Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are here for the final match of the day. One that both Maeve and I are personally very excited to see. My name's Ben Kiraki. This is Maeve Rock, and we are going to be hosting our very own match versus Jamie Boyt, who usually is on this side of the mic and decided to go on the other side of the mic for this match in the battle between the UK and Costa Rica for this week to see who advances into the next stage of the tournament.
Yeah, you and I have probably been talking a little bit too much trash in which Jamie Boy really wanted us to commentate this match for him. Uh, I'm obviously very excited. Jamie's one of the people who I've watched in terms of watching players for years. His team building is always very interesting. He's bringing a very Jamie Boyd team today, which is exactly what we expected from him. He's running his favorite fake out user in Salazzle. So I know that we'll be seeing a lot of that. I'm sure he'll be popping up in chat explaining the usefulness of Salazzle versus a Pokemon like Incineroar. So, I'm very excited, obviously. There is another surprise on Jamie's team. I do think that might have been shown during that team preview. I'm very excited. I have been told to make apple pie puns, and I'm really struggling to think of some right now. So I will probably take some breaks while you're doing your color to think of apple pie jokes.
I'm sure you'll manage it, Maeve. I'm sure there's some out there. But before we get to the Pokemon on these players' teams, we'll just have a quick look at the bracket between this group. So Peru have been absolutely dominating the group here, having 2 wins already against Costa Rica and Germany. United Kingdom just taking up second place here. Germany and Costa Rica both 1 point to their names. And we've got a little bit of an interesting dynamic in the group in that for the UK to go through, we would need to have a win in this match that would guarantee going through to the next stage. But of course, if there was a draw between the United UK and Costa Rica, then Germany could still win their match against Peru and take the second place slot. So everything still to play for, and certainly going to be really interesting to see how the today and tomorrow goes with the last set of matches in the group to see who goes through.
Yeah, and this was probably one of the tougher pools of the World Cup. I'm sure you feel that very well right now.
Yeah.
Peru is one of those teams that has just been an absolute firecracker all tournament. And then, of course, the United Kingdom and Germany are 2 very well-known and well-established teams. So it's definitely a lot, I think, for you guys to kind of deal with here, especially, if Jamie wins in this match, then you guys are guaranteed to move on forward. But it is like those weird points at the end of a soccer season where if this team ties, then you go through. But if they lose, then you're guaranteed to go through. But if they tie, it's one of those really crazy things. So I'm excited to see exactly how this one turns out here.
Yeah, exactly. And no scores on the doors at the moment. We do have one result that's yet to go up. I had to take a break between casting the matches earlier in the afternoon to play my match, and then to come back here to commentate this match between UK and Costa Rica. So there is a score there, but I will keep that under my chest at the moment. Not reveal that. You'll have to go back to the results page to see what the score is there. But yeah, without further ado, since there's no teams come out from either the UK or Costa Rica so far, let's go and see our first player, and that's going to be our very own Jamie Boyt.
Jamie Boyt here has, I think, 3 standard Pokemon on this team in Zacian, Rillaboom, and Urshifu, and then 3 slightly more unconventional. Mimikyu's pretty, not the most outrageous thing here, but then Salazzle and Appleton are some really niche Boyt picks, like we're used to seeing from him in his building. Of course, Jamie is one of those incredible players, top 16 World Championships 2 times, had an undefeated run in 2019 on day 1, I believe. And then the regional champion 3 times. So Jamie, of course, extremely accomplished, has a method to his madness.
Certainly a method to his madness. Yeah, definitely unconventional as well, as you mentioned earlier, Maeve. The use of these Pokemon is really quite unique to the way that Jamie plays. And while it may look on the surface like Jamie has a little bit lost his marbles, let's say, potentially when he's putting Pokemon in his team, there is always, and knowing him as well as I do, there is always a method to his madness. There's always a reason. I'm looking forward to seeing. I've been hearing about it for the last 4 or 5 days while we've been prepping for this match in the UK group. Exactly what this Appleton does. So I'm going to let that play out. We'll just let it speak for itself in this match, should it choose to go against his opponent, Esteban Hernández from Costa Rica, who is a 3-time World Championships competitor, top 4 at the Costa Rica special event. That's a regional level event, and Guatemala special event finalist in 2017 as well. So a bit of a history, some high rankings going on there as well. And running one of the more fun teams of late. I believe we saw it in the recent Pokemon Invitational tournament. The Groudon, Entei, Cherrim, Rillaboom, Dragapult, and backing up with that Mandibuzz.
Yeah, Groudon Cherrim's one of those teams that I'm really loving right now. Flower Gift is such a fun ability by boosting that the attack and special defense of your partner Pokemon when you have the sun up. So it pairs obviously very well with that Groudon and with Drought. And then Mandibuzz as well is a Pokemon that we've seen a little bit, not a whole lot here, but it does have Overcoat, I believe is the ability. So it doesn't deal with any Spore type moves. Dragapult is a Pokemon that really faded out a lot. It was one of the most dominant Pokemon in the very beginning of the VGC 2020 format. So it's really interesting to see it being used in utility at the end here with this restricted format. You know, Dragapult was such a prominent Dynamax user. And when it wasn't Dynamaxing, you know, you saw it on Colossal teams. You saw it with, you know, some utility with Breaking Swipe and, you know, a couple of other things. So I love to see it doing other things in this format, especially helping out partner Pokemon that can really use those extra pieces of power from that Dragapult.
Definitely, and it's got such an interesting typing as well that really lends itself to these forms of teams, and that's going to probably play a little bit into this matchup. One of the things that Dragapult can do, depending on how it's trained, is outspeed things like the Zacian. Unless the Zacian is running as fast as it can possibly go. Obviously, there is a few other Pokemon to take into account, and Groudon versus Zacian, if we look at just the restricted pairings, doesn't look to be a particularly favourable matchup for Jamie here. Obviously, the Salazzle will help being able to launch some powerful fire moves into the Groudon. Certainly, the Rillaboom and Cherrim, Jamie's Hernandez side of the field, but it's going to be a little bit all to play for, and it will depend somewhat as well on how this Appleton, or whether or not the Appleton comes to the game, and how it integrates into the team. And it's one of those Pokemon that's really, really bulky, really able to take a hit from a lot of Pokemon, especially with its Grass Dragon typing and the ability Thick That. It can keep its resistance to fire moves. It's already resistant to ground moves, and so there's a lot of Pokemon. It's gonna be a real struggle for any damage to be done to it. But we're gonna start off with game 1, turn 1, and Appleton Salazzle are on the field already.
Yeah, Appleton, Salazzle, and then Dragapult and Groudon. So I was really hoping this wouldn't be one of those situations where we have a really cool Pokemon that just never comes to the game. So I'm glad Jamie let it right out of the gate, along with his really unconventional partner, Salazzle here. Appleton, I think, is something that I wasn't expecting right off the bat. It wouldn't love to take something like a Heat Crash. It would still be at neutral damage, and Appleton is so bulky, just as a Pokemon in comparison to Flapple, you know, the offensive version of that evolution there. And of course, having that fake out pressure as well, just on that Groudon, could be pretty nice.
It certainly could be, and Dragapult is really putting on a bit of pressure to that Appleton as well. Having Dragon Darts as an opportunity to deal some probably quite respectable damage to the Appleton as well as the Salazzle. Salazzle not known for taking hits particularly well, so yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a mix of turn damage-wise on this first part of the game.
Yeah, Groudon swaps out though for Esteban, brings in the Entei. Appleton swaps out for Mimikyu, so Jamie Boyt said, here, I brought this, it's fun, let me bring in something else. Shadow Ball though from the Dragapult is going to go into the Salazzle slot actually, and does a really good chunk of damage. Salazzle goes for an overheat in the sun, Dragapult avoids it though, so a really tough turn one for Jamie here.
Definitely, and one of the things that Jamie really likes using is that eject pack, which we saw in team preview, where you can overheat, you can take a stat drop, you can then switch out your Salazzle for free and pivot back in. So maybe Jamie wanting to reposition that Appleton to bring it in a slightly nicer position, maybe thinking that it would be forced out, and in the meantime you get some decent damage onto that Dragapult, which is now taking so much damage from a critical hit Shadow Sneak.
Yeah, a ton of damage there. That Mimikyu then showing that it is that life orb by losing some HP. But a Shadow Ball here from the Dragapult onto the Mimikyu slot will actually break that disguise there and drop that special defense. So it will lose a little bit more HP from that disguise. Is showing exactly that this is a more offensive Mimikyu, trying to be as strong as possible. Salazzle does get that overheat off because it was not targeted by the Dragapult. Is enough to finish it off. We'll take that stat drop, and then that eject pact will swap that out here because of that stat drop, and it will allow itself to regain those stats later. So whatever swaps in here, it could possibly take something from this Entei if they do know that Jamie likes to run that eject pack on that Salazzle. It just depends on exactly how much Esteban knows about Jamie's playstyle here. So if it went for some type of fire attack into this Appleton, that would be great. It instead goes for a Sacred Fire into the Mimikyu, which is enough to knock it out there after busting that disguise.
Yeah, and again, you know, Pokemon being traded, but definitely I think in Jamie's favor here, Dragapult being a special variety, using Shadow Ball could have meant that it had access to Draco Meteor. Draco Meteor would definitely be a very good thing to use against something like Appleton, should you get into the right position. But now, if Jamie is using that Thick Fat ability, which, given that we saw the the Rocky Helmet item in Team Preview, you'd be unlikely to see something like Ripen as the ability without holding a berry. So, going to be resisting both fire and ground here, and going to make it quite difficult for Esteban to get any particular damage on that Appleton before it starts launching attacks out, maybe starts doing some other sort of shenanigans in this turn. So Esteban's got a little bit of work to do, and he's got to do it while having to be careful of taking a big amount of damage from Salazzle's overheat in the sun.
Yeah, Salazzle actually goes for a fake out into the Groudon here, which did protect itself. Another Sacred Fire from this Entei into the Salazzle is enough to knock it out, so won't be dealing with any more fake outs from Jamie's side with that Salazzle. It could also come possibly from a Rillaboom here. Appleton goes for an Iron Defense, so Appleton is trying to stay on the field and be as bulky as possible after losing its second partner Pokemon here. So after losing Mimikyu, now it knows that it's going to be staying on the field. It can't switch out, can't lose that stat gain right there, and just making it a real big problem. Zacian switches in for where that Salazzle was and gets that attack boost from Intrepid Sword.
Yeah, and now looking at the rest of Esteban's team, I'm struggling to see where any damage will come out that is able to deal with the Appleton, barring critical hits. I mean, Jamie's probably quite content to sit there and just keep iron defensing, keep on boosting those defenses, and then, you know, eventually he'll probably take the win. Might take a few turns, but hey, with the iron defense making your Appleton not take any damage at all, even that Zacian next to it that came in for Jamie, doesn't really mind. Jamie doesn't really mind if it goes down to either of these Pokemon on Esteban's side of the field.
Yeah, Zacian goes for a close combat into the Entei, and the Entei instead fires right back with a Sacred Fire, which after that special defense and defense drop from that close combat, easily enough to knock it out here. So then we'll have to see exactly what the Groudon goes for. It does go for a Heat Crash in the sun, and even though Thick Fat makes it so this doesn't do a whole lot of damage, it actually does even less than I thought, and takes a pretty good chunk from that Rocky Helmet, almost equivalent to the damage that it dealt. And then another Iron Defense here from this Appleton. So Jamie really setting up for a long, slow end game here.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an apple pie you want sitting on the windowsill right there.
I thought the same joke.
It's just, yeah, I got there first. Yeah, the Appleton is just, you can see how little damage it's taking. Another iron defense coming into play. The Appleton now taking almost nothing from that boosted Sacred Fire coming out. Leech Seed coming into the Groudon, but Substitute is protecting it, so Esteban does have a little bit of recourse. There is obviously the ability for Sacred Fire to get the burn on the Appleton, and maybe that could allow it to go down a little bit faster. At least that residual damage would maybe change the way that Jamie has to play, but I think really Esteban's got to fish for some critical hits here and just keep attacking into the Appleton until it goes down.
Yeah, Sacred Fire here once again has to be fishing for a burn, which it does get, so only the Leech Seed would be able to do anything in terms of offsetting that damage. And the Precipice Blades here into the Appleton as well. Just so little damage after all of this. Jamie could, of course, go for something like that Leech Seed, but that Rocky Helmet damage with that Life Orb, once the Substitute breaks, is going to be really problematic, as long as something like that Body Press is able to get enough damage to break that Substitute. I have realized, though, Jamie is basically made a Grass Dragon Celesteela out of this Appleton just based on the moves that it's carrying right now.
It basically has. I mean, it's the same form of game plan that Celesteela did really like to play over the last few years since it got brought into the format in 2017 season. And we're going to just go back round the same thing. I think it's quite important to note, though, that the early game where Jamie was targeting down that Dragapult was really crucial, because if that Dragapult was still on the field and it was one of those special attacking Dragapults, then it would have been able to do a lot more damage through the iron defense. And of course, Body Press, if that's the only way that Jamie has to put damage onto Esteban's team, it would have had a much tougher time in front of a Dragapult than in front of free Pokemon that can't really hit it for super effective damage.
Yeah, that Rillaboom does come in here, does handle a Body Press after there is a Protect on the substituted Groudon, so not a ton of damage there, obviously, that Groudon can take because it's being so bulky and strong right now. And also having that Grassy Terrain up now from the Rillaboom is going to be really helpful for this Groudon that is taking that Life Orb damage, and then every time it hits this Appleton, it takes, with that Heat Crash, it does take that Rocky Helmet damage as well when it is outside of its substitute. So going to be a little bit tougher. The Fake Out from the Rillaboom onto this Appleton won't be doing anything like a iron defense here, but does take that Rocky Helmet damage. Precipice Blades avoids the attack, though, so no extra damage for Appleton from that P-Blades.
No, and in fact some health back from the Rillaboom coming in. It's just an uphill battle here. I think Esteban really needs to think about how he can target this down a little bit better, make a little bit more advantage of that Dragapult maybe, especially if it does have access to Draco Meteor. I think that's really the way to go here. Groudon switching out though into Entei, removing that substitute from play, and Rillaboom going for a Protect, actually revealing it. It's going to be now the Appleton to decide on whether it wants to attack or just go for another Iron Defense. Boost its stats up. It's now at 6 stages of increased defense, so really going to be taking absolutely no damage whatsoever. Quite interesting position here. The sun has actually left the field, so Esteban probably wanting to bring the Groudon back in for the Rillaboom in this turn and get a Sacred Fire off from the Entei. If that's crits, it could do some significant damage, especially boosted by the sun. But more importantly, Sacred Fire is quite a strange physical move that doesn't make any contact. So Entei doesn't have to worry about taking any chip from that Rocky Helmet, and is probably the ideal Pokemon, even at its low health, to be launching attacks into that Appleton.
Yeah, the Rillaboom switches out here for that Groudon. Gonna reset the sun. This is a time when you want a Pokemon like Urshifu Single Strike, just a Pokemon that can always crits, especially with a Pokemon that has +6 defenses. The Drought comes out here, going to boost the power of that Sacred Fire that Entei is shooting off now into the Appleton. Does so little damage, and the Appleton goes for a body press here into that Entei slot. This is enough to knock it out. So now it is 2 Pokemon to 1. Jamie has access to recover. If he's going something like a timer stall here, he does have to be mindful this Groudon can set up a sub, it can protect, it can go for a Precipice Blades and do a whole lot of damage just over time, just being whittled down. And until this Appleton goes for something like a recover, you know, you have to be mindful of your HP percentage as timer goes out and the Rillaboom comes back out onto this grassy terrain, but it will not be able to reset it again.
Yeah, one of the things that's quite nice about that actually, Maeve, is the grassy terrain on the field taking a little bit of time, the burn taking a little bit of time, the fake out and substitute pressure, and just every time that you can add just a little bit of an animation, you're increasing the chance that you get to that end of that timer. We did also see the protect coming out from the Rillaboom on Esteban's side of the field, and so, you know, both of these Pokemon can play defensively, as you mentioned earlier. But I still think the early game was very, very quick. You know, we got to this position quite early in the match. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was enough time for Jamie to just keep launching body presses out. And yeah, just getting to a 1-on-1. And at a point where you've got a 1-on-1, especially while Rillaboom and Groudon don't have access to recovery, and Appleton does, you're probably going to come out on top there.
Yeah, and that Groudon doing a Heat Crash instead of setting up a substitute, it took a ton of damage to itself with that Light Orb and that Rocky Helmet chip. U-turn from the Rillaboom here is just going to be trying to do damage, but that Rocky Helmet is so annoying with this thing at +6. Another Heat Crash from the Groudon here into this Appleton. Doesn't even bring it down to half health. It takes that Rocky Helmet damage. It takes that Life Orb damage. Esteban is really going to be knocking himself out here. This body press, though, is enough to almost knock that Rillaboom out, and it will not gain any health back from that grassy terrain. So now both of these Pokemon, if they go for any physical attacks, they will be knocked out. So they have to play 2 timer with 2 Pokemon, because that's the only way you win timer. And I don't know how many protects in a row you need for that.
Quite a few, I think. Definitely not timer going for... not the timer play for Esteban. Go for the U-turn, knocking out his own Rillaboom. And a Heat Crash there. I like that from Esteban. That's losing in style right there. Double Rocky Helmet knockout. Yeah, really appreciate that play, actually. Props to Esteban.
Jamie Boyt.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can give the moral win, shall we say, to Esteban there, rather than the actual win to Jamie. I think definitely for that closeout of that game.
Yeah, I do want to thank Esteban for making us not sit through an end game of many tries for protect over that. Definitely very helpful. It is a Jamie Boyt team. It's a fun team. Appleton's a Pokemon that I really wasn't sure exactly what it did until I found out. It's almost like a Celesteela or a Ferrothorn. And by putting, Ferrothorn I think is a better example, right? Because you have the Iron Barbs on Ferrothorn as its ability, so it's almost like a Rocky Helmet where you're taking damage every time you hit it with that physical move. And that Body Press Ferrothorn was something we saw a lot during Series 3 and 4. It's kind of when it started to pick up popularity. I know I saw it at a couple of smaller events that were run. I know Ingrid ran one a couple times at an event in New Jersey way back in, I believe, March of 2020. So very interesting to see it being used, but in a different form now. Appleton can be very bulky and can be very defensive. And knowing that Jamie Boyt knew that the main thing he had to take care of was that Dragapult, I think really helped with that beginning early game. And, you've got so many Pokemon, this thing is not going to worry too much about that fire typing damage with that thick fat ability. And we'll go into game 2 here and see exactly what the changes are here for the leads, for the game plan, trying to stop this big wall of an apple.
Yeah, exactly. Esteban gonna have to find a way to chop them apples up and put himself into a better position in this game. Leading off with the Groudon and the Entei, putting in pressure, but a switch up from Jamie actually, bringing that Rapid Strike Urshifu with that Zacian, and that's going to be a little bit on, well, both of these Pokemon a little bit on the back foot, even though you have that Rapid Strike Urshifu that loves to attack into both ground and fire type Pokemon with Surging Strikes. Unfortunately, the critical hits don't go through the Sun attack modifiers, or damage modifiers, should I say, for reducing the power of water type moves. But Entei leaving the field, and that Cherrim is arriving.
Cherrim is here. It is going to be that Flower Gift ability, making it that very happy, dancing, cute, pink-petaled Cherrim, getting that ability for its partner. A helping hand from the Urshifu, though. Very interesting to see, because the Zacian will now go for a close combat into the Cherrim, which was that Entei slot. It is enough to knock it out, so that boost from Cherrim immediately disappears. That Groudon is still on the field, though. Could still set up something like a substitute, or go for something like a Heat Crash, or a Precipice Blades into both of these Pokemon. That does not miss. Both of them do not love taking it. Zacian gets knocked out. Urshifu gets down to under half of its HP here. So Zacian is now completely off the field. Was only able to get a knockout onto that Cherrim, which is not the Pokemon I think he wanted knocked out. Because Cherrim and Appleton, I think there's a pretty clear Appleton winner there.
Definitely, and yeah, definitely. I think it looks like Esteban's getting in a better position. Mimikyu coming into the field for Jamie, and Entei coming back onto the field for Esteban. And if the Mimikyu goes for the Shadow Sneak, it can get a little bit of damage off before either the Entei or potentially the Groudon, depending on how both of them are trained, attack. But the Entei is likely to be able to burn that Mimikyu with Sacred Fire. Certainly going to be doing a lot of damage, and we've seen the Life Orb item on the Groudon. That's not something that either Urshifu nor Mimikyu want to be able to take, and Jamie definitely knows that, is playing a little bit more defensively.
Yeah, Jamie protects that Mimikyu here, and the Sacred Fire from the Entei not able to do any damage, and the Surging Strikes from Urshifu in the Sun will still do a pretty hefty chunk of damage to either of the Pokemon here on Esteban's side of the field. Onto this Entei, it's going to do a pretty good amount. That critical hit every time, because that's the way Surging Strikes operates here. Something that Esteban probably would have loved to have even on that Appleton, even in the Sun. Gets it down to just about 2/3, just 1/3 of its HP left. A Precipice Blades from this Groudon again, who's pretty comfortable to just keep firing these off. Goes into that Urshifu, is enough to knock it out. No more Helping Hands, which is a really interesting tech move, utility that we don't see on Urshifu all that often.
No, definitely not. And just like in game 1, game 2's early game is going quite quickly, but this time Jamie on the back foot, not the front foot, and Appleton arrives on the field quite late into the game rather than quite early. And you've got to think that Esteban has the Dragapult sitting in the back waiting to try to put as much damage as possible onto that Appleton. The only thing that's really standing in its way is the Mimikyu on Jamie's side of the field, and that's just protected. Now it can't switch because Esteban has taken another knockout, and so we're in a position where actually the Mimikyu is likely to go down this turn unless the Shadow Sneak is able to pick up the knockout on this Entei. It is not. That Entei is going to be able to retaliate with a Crunch.
Yeah, Crunch into the Mimikyu will break its Disguise. It will take that extra little bit of damage now from the way that Disguise works as a mechanic after taking some Life Orb damage from its Shadow Sneak in the beginning. A Heat Crash as well from this Groudon is going to go into the Mimikyu. So that is a very quick 2-hit knockout from 2 of the Pokemon on Esteban's side. Great bit of team synergy and teamwork here. It is facing that Appleton, who does actually get the Leech Seed off into this Groudon, who did not have a substitute set up yet. But like you said, if there is this Dragapult in the back and it's carrying something like a Draco Meteor, it's going to be very problematic, even as this Groudon loses HP from that Leech Seed, from that Rocky Helmet, and from that Life Orb. And this Appleton needs to set up quick if it wants to take any big attacks from either of these Pokemon.
Exactly, and quick is not really what Appleton does, as we saw in the last game. It's really one of those Pokemon that wants to set up on the field, sort of maybe in the early game if it can, but really more likely the mid game. Get itself a bit set up, and you get into these situations where you're in the end game and now you can actually capitalize on all of those boosts. That's not going to happen in this game as Dragapult switches in for the Groudon. Sacred Fire we see do a fairly respectable amount of damage and get the burn as well. So that, yeah, that Appleton is not looking like it's going to be very healthy for very long.
Yeah, that Appleton not super comfortable. It does get that iron defense boost, but now hurt by the burn. There is no grassy terrain to help offset that burn damage right now, because obviously that Rillaboom was swapped for that Cherrim on Esteban's side, and not having any sort of recovery besides going for recover is really big. The Draco Meteor from this Dragapult, like we said, is going to be the only thing doing super effective damage into this Appleton, which is now knocked out after that burn. Even with one iron defense boost, this Appleton could not hang on.
Not in the slightest, and Esteban takes the win in game 2. Really exciting switch in momentum there from game 1, where it looked like there was nothing that Esteban could really do with the way that Jamie played the early game. Now with the way that Esteban played the early game in game 2, it was all in his favor. We saw, Appleton could take a Sacred Fire, no problem, but Esteban played a really safe game. Knew what his win condition was, and that was keeping Dragapult in the back, and he managed to execute that perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Appleton is a Pokemon that is very interesting. It's definitely your end game. It's your slow end game Pokemon. So losing the Pokemon in the very beginning, losing that Zacian especially, is very tough, because even though you had that helping hands, the only knockout was on that Cherrim, and Cherrim is not the most important Pokemon on that team when you're worried about knocking out an Appleton, right? Cherrim knows Solar Blade. That's doing not a lot of damage to this Appleton, even if it's in the sun. Cherrim can do a couple of other things. Solar Blade is its big thing right now. Groudon's Heat Crash and Precipice Blades, we saw how little those were doing with all of those boosts. So having that Dragapult and having that special attack from that Draco Meteor there, if you can get that off early enough into this Appleton setup, then you've got the game, because what Jamie's win con here is to set that Appleton up, sit there and just be bulky and just sit around a little bit until you can get that Leech Seed damage off. You can build up those iron defenses, and you can get little bits of damage every single time from that Rocky Helmet, as long as you're being hit with contact moves. So it's a lot. Jamie's gonna have to focus, I think, on once again protecting the Pokemon that he has, especially if his Appleton is his endgame. Once again, you have to maybe bring something. I don't think that Urshifu did as much as he wanted. I think that helping hand was nice turn 1, but I do think that the Salazzle was a bit more useful. I think at least having Fake Out Pressure was enough to change the way that Esteban played his game.
It definitely was, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to view Game 3. Game 3 was played, of course, but there was a disconnection from internet issues later in the match. Esteban and Jamie and the managers had talked, and they agreed, Esteban and Jamie both agreed to have Jamie win the match. Apparently I don't know the exact position, but it was very strongly in Jamie's favor. So clearly he went back to the drawing board after game 2 and was able to pick up the win. So congratulations to Jamie. I'm really happy that we've been able to showcase both Jamie's team building, for one, of course, and 2, for seeing Esteban really give him a good game, a good set, and adjust so well in game 2. I really props to Esteban for being able to do that. So unfortunately, that is all of the games that we have to play today. Thank you to everyone who's came and joined us on the stream. We've had a great time behind the mic. So goodbye from me, and we hope to see you again tomorrow for all of the action.